We've been going over a list that was given to the Abbey community about maybe 3 or 4 years ago by Geshe Dorje Damdol when he came here to teach on the philosophical tenets of Tibetan Buddhism, and he had I can't remember how long it was, but he gave a very sweet teaching on bodhicitta, reminding us that if you want to generate bodhicitta, it has to be in tandem with having some sort of wisdom and clarity in your mind to really make it be of the greatest benefit. So over the past few weeks, we've been going over, there are 8 points in the list called General Suggestions for Generating Bodhicitta. And I'll go over the first, we're now on number 5, and I'll go over the first 4 quickly, just recite them, and then we'll spend some time on number 5, which has got a lot of good stuff in it. So the first one was, anger is the worst enemy of bodhicitta. Combat it. As much as possible, look for the goodness in the other person. Everyone has some good qualities at least. Number 3, as much as possible, try and say yes when it comes to helping someone, particularly when you are busy, stressed, or under any situation. This is the test. You will discover this is a great training and thus a great opportunity. Try your best not to say, this is not possible because of that, that is not possible because of this. See if there is some way by which to make it happen. Number 4, as much as possible, think or imagine the relationship of you and the other person, particularly the destitute and difficult ones, in the light of a mother and her only cute small child. I did a slight alteration of that and said it wasn't a difficult person. Many times I can't imagine a difficult person being my child, but I can imagine being somebody else's child who I can look at in that way. And then number 5, as much as possible, always be optimistic and let your compassion and not the external rules govern you. So I put together some things that Venerable had shared in Missoula last year around this idea of what is optimism in regards to other kinds of things that our minds struggle with. And then how to use compassion wisely. So I went ahead and I did a little categories here. I have optimistic versus pessimistic, realistic versus, optimistic versus realistic, pessimistic versus idealistic. I think I just confused my notes. Okay. Optimistic, which is what the quote is talking about. And I wanted to kind of put for my own benefit and to help you. She had talked about how we confuse optimism with idealism and how we confuse realism with pessimism and how to be able to distinguish them in our minds. So the first one is optimistic, and I just have some qualities when I've thought about this and how the mind operates under some of these different states. When one is optimistic, I find that my mind is quite open. There's an open-mindedness that whatever happens in the situation or in the relationship, that I will use the experience to learn more about myself and more about others. So there's this, despite whatever, if it succeeds, if it doesn't succeed, I'm going to try to use this opportunity to learn something helpful. There is a quality of aspiration in optimism. You know, you really want to garner an energy that can sustain you through an experience or sustain you through a project or sustain you through a relationship in a really healthy way. There's a very good chance you'll always see some sort of benefit no matter what happens. There's an enthusiasm. When I feel optimistic, I feel kind of a joy and eagerness, an enthusiasm. I also find that my mind is flexible. I'm willing to kind of sort of make adjustments as I'm going along. And tends to be quite a bit more of a broader view of the situation or the relationship or what you're about to, the endeavor you're about to start. On the other side of that is pessimism, being pessimistic, which when I find that kind of glass half empty thinking is that my mind is really quite closed. And there's a doubt or a skepticism regarding what kind of benefit And I find that the pessimism sometimes starts even before I undergo a project, or it arises in my mind in the middle of an experience, and it really stops me cold, or it brings my energy down. It closes my view. It exaggerates the difficulty that we're encountering, and that it kind of magnifies the obstacles, so there's no way to really look at things realistically, because you're sort of exaggerating. Oh gosh, they didn't answer my telephone call. Oh gosh, they probably don't care. They probably have some other things. They're probably just avoiding me. I mean, we get into really exaggerating things that have absolutely no relevance sometimes, except they're just things that happen. We can't see all the positive aspects of the person or the project. Once again, what are the opportunities? What are the places of growth? We are really closed off to seeing what they are. And we get disgruntled and discouraged very easily. And there is, for me, it's the difference between an inability to see the broad view, or there's an unwillingness or a resistance to see the broad view. And these are states of mind that can be trained into and nourished and trained away from and supported by just being very, very aware of it. I find that I've had somewhat of my mind has always been a little bit on the half empty glass kind of mind. And since I've moved to the Abbey and started practicing the Dharma, it's not that it goes to being an idealist, but it's going to be a little bit more of an optimist. Okay, this is where I got a little bit confused here. Okay, then the other two things is that being realistic versus being idealistic. And this one I think involves quite a bit of wisdom, and that there's a clarity brought to the situation. One is trying to really look at things clearly and practically for what they are. There's not a lot of exaggeration or embellishing the qualities or the conditions or the experience of what's going to happen. You're really trying to look at things squarely and clearly as they stand. For me, there's not a lot of charge to the outcome. So even though I'm endeavoring, I've got, some optimism, because optimism and realism being realistic can also coexist. At least in my mind, I can see that there's a difference. But there's an equanimity to being realistic. There's not a charge to what's going to happen if it fails, if it succeeds. I find that I'm much more interested in the process of the journey rather than the goal. And that there's also a practical understanding of the capacity that I have in that situation or in that endeavor. I kind of sometimes I even lay out, okay, what have I got going for me? And what are the things that I'm going to need to have a little bit of a learning curve or are new for me that I'm going to have to make some adjustments about, as well as being honest and trying to understand the capacity of others. So there's a real nice balancing when we have a realistic view of any type of experience or projects. And then for being idealistic, which is the one that I forgot to put on here, there's excitement, there's anticipation, you can't wait. You've got the whole thing planned out on how it's going to go, and you're going to have a fabulous time. There's going to be no obstacles. There's going to be no difficulties. There's an exaggeration. Different than pessimism is that it swings to the other side, is that there's absolutely nothing that's going to go wrong. Everything's going to happen the way that you want. There's a lot of charge to the outcome. There's a lot of investment on what's going to happen, how you're going to look, and what it's going to feel like. There's a lot of attachment, at least in my mind, when I get idealistic about a situation. And then sometimes because I've got the excitement going on and I'm not looking at it clearly, my understanding of what my capacity is in the experience, the endeavor, or the relationship is not quite clearly defined. In fact, I'm not paying attention because I'm so excited about having the experience that I'm not even looking at what am I bringing to the situation, and what are other people bringing into the situation, and how am I going to deal with things if they don't happen the way that I want. And I also find when I'm idealistic is that I'm easily disappointed. There's just this kind of deflation, like someone has burst my bubble. And there's no way to look at the experience and say, well, that was different, that was fun, that was interesting, I learned something about myself that I didn't realize. There's no ability to look at the positive things. So it's almost like you go from being an idealist to being a pessimist, like in one felt swoop, as soon as the experience looks like it's not going to happen the way that you want. At least this is the way that I've been thinking about how my mind works in relationship to these two different pairs of friend and near enemy, or friend and enemy of the mind. And then the second part of the quote, so taking the optimism into your life and letting your compassion and not the external rules govern you. Well, compassion is the wish for all sentient beings to be free of suffering and its causes. And that is a very, very powerful feeling to have with optimism. You know, it really empowers the optimism empowers the compassion, and the compassion sort of balances out the optimism. I think from my experience, if I don't have any wisdom in the situation, I'm going in there because I really want to save the world, is that I can do some really foolish things with a kind heart, but it ends up blowing up in my face. So Venerable has that term, Mickey Mouse Bodhisattva. So we need to know our compassion, we want it to grow, we want it to be combined with this wonderful optimism that we're going to learn as much as we can from whatever our endeavors are. But to not go in there with understanding the situation, understanding, almost like having a reality check. The wisdom sort of coincides with the quality of being realistic. Go in and check and just say, okay, you know, do I have any expectations here? What is it that I feel I'm capable of? And if it doesn't go the way that I wish and it ends up being very, very difficult, what are the tools that I have to kind of hold myself in that same compassionate heart that I bring into the experience in the get-go? And in the end, without the wisdom, sometimes the compassion, we get into personal distress, or we get burned out, or the benefit that we wanted so much to have in this situation for others doesn't pan out. So we have to always remember that as much as we want to benefit sentient beings, we want to be able to somehow support or be perhaps one of the causes and conditions for others to have some happiness in their lives. We also have to be very, very wise and very realistic about what that capacity is, and to be far more interested in the relationship to sentient beings rather than whether we succeed in our goal or not, is to care, to love, to wish them well, and to be, you know, a little bit more wise about how it's going to turn out. Because we can't bring compassion into any situation. It's not going to last, it's not going to be sustained if we've got an attachment to how it's going to end up. And so I think this is a lovely quote. I think that external rules, I tend to go more toward, well, what does society say? What do my friends and family think? I think external rules, I mean, I wouldn't want to break any laws. I wouldn't want to break any traffic, you know, laws. I'm not quite sure what I think about not let the external rules govern you. But if I'm afraid about what people will think, I have my own internal rules that sort of hold me back from really expressing myself and nourishing the compassionate heart that I have, because I'm wondering if people are going to think I'm odd, over the top, pushing too hard, doing too much, unrealistic or whatever. So I've got my own internal rules that sometimes get in the way of me really using my compassionate heart to engage the world. So I made slight changes in the slogan. Anyway, I hope you found that helpful.